Thank you guys for joining. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. And why would part of what I'm going to talk about is why you might want to choose a more responsible shrub and what that means. Um, you're here, so I'm assuming that you want to do that. Um, that my slides won't advance now.
You try the space bar?
There we
Oh. It's just got caught up in the thinking.
go. In part, many of our traditional landscaping shrubs are invasive or have become invasive, so that um, they the exotic species then have the destructive effects on the balance of our ecosystems in the forest, in that they take over all of our native plants and we don't have the biodiversity to support our wildlife and birds and pollinators. And many of these species that we have around our house were introduced deliberately because they solved a purpose in agriculture, horticulture, or in soil conservation, and no one really knew how um, they would respond once they were in a non-native environment. So, as many of states have done, New York State has begun to regulate what they consider the most important um, or the worst invasives, and by either making them prohibited or um, restrictive. So for tonight, what are invasive species? They're species that are non-native to that is non-native to a particular ecosystem and whose introduction is likely to cause some kind of economic or environmental harm. And by native, we mean indigenous to by belonging here since birth. But many of the plants that we do call native really have been established here long before the current plants. So some of our plants that we do call natives at one time would have been called exotics, but our pollinators and wildlife have been able to adapt to them. But the difference between the prohibited and the regulated invasive species per New York regulations is if they're a prohibited plant, you cannot have them with the intent to sell, import, and you shouldn't be able to buy them. And you shouldn't transport them or introduce them to any new environment. Whereas regulated, you really probably shouldn't be able to buy them, although I do believe some of them are still available. But certainly they should be kept in a controlled state, not one that where they could spread uncontrollably. And how you keep a bird from eating a burning bush berry and pooping it in the woods only to be grown in the woods is beyond me. But there are some plants and shrubs that are still just in a regulated state. So, what are some of the prohibited plants? I just pulled the ones that were shrubs and a couple of the trees out. There's a whole list of all types of plants, and I will give you the reference at the end of the talk so that you can look them all up. And the autumn olive, water privet, common buckhorn, Japanese barberry, multifloral rose, and wineberry are considered prohibited. And really, if you have them, I strongly urge you to take them out and get rid of them. You certainly shouldn't be able to buy them because they have really taken over our forest and uh, landscape and become a problem. Some of the regulated ones are the black locust, which is a tree, along with in the burning bush, and the Norway maple, which is also a tree. Um, and those just spread more than we would like them. So why is this bad? Like I spoke to a little bit is that the invasive species can harm our natural communities by reducing the biological diversity, meaning that our pollinators, birds, and wildlife can't get the food that they need to sustain life and to go about providing us the food supplies, which is their job to do. And it also alters our landscape. Many of our parks and recreation sources have particularly been taken over by some of the, like the burning bush and some of those other shrubs that were a threat. And natives are better. They're more easily grown. They're hardier. They do tend to add the biodiversity by supporting our wildlife and birds and pollinators. Most of the shrubs that I'm going to talk about are natives. There are a couple. There's one that's definitely not, one that is in question. So we'll talk about the different shrubs and how to go, what substitutes some of your favorite landscape shrubs perhaps, and maybe some choices that you might choose instead to have. So instead of the Japanese barberry, and I know a lot of people really like the barberry, the eastern ninebark, the spice bush, the bush clinifoil, the fragrant sumac, or the Virginia rose can all be good choices for that. And we'll talk about each of those. The eastern ninebark. The eastern ninebark requires full sun to part shade. It is a very arching shrub, so it works best in a naturalizing and informal hedge. It grows to about 6 to 10 feet tall and wide. It has lovely white blooms in the late spring that are of special value to our native bees, and then red seed capsules in the fall. And then it also does have some winter interest in that it has exfoliating bark, and you can see the arching branches, which makes it an interesting shrub to look at in the winter. The spice bush is one of my favorites, particularly. It grows 6 to 12 feet tall. It does well from sun to part shade, or even shade, and it does get denser, and you have more flowering and more berries, and the more sun you have. But in the shade, it still produces some flowers and some berries. It is the flowers, it has white flowers or clusters of small green yellow flowers in the spring, and the flowers have a sweet scent. It has berries in the fall that the birds really, really do love. And the flowers, berries, and leaves all emit a spicy scent, which makes it deer resistant. The one disadvantage is that you do have to have a male among your females to be able to have the berries. And some nurseries don't always identify whether it's a female plant or a male plant. So you really have to ask and get a hold of someone who knows what they're talking about. The bush clinifoil, which I always knew as the potentilla, is a smaller shrub in that it only gets 3 to 4 feet high and wide. It does prefer sun over shade, but it does okay with part shade. It has a lovely gray-green delicate leaf, and then bright yellow flowers that bloom from July to September. And the flowers attract the birds and bees and hum around. And I know some people go, well, I don't want anything that's going to attract bees because they sting and I got kids. But only the female bee stings, and it only stings if you're disturbing its hive, or if it feels like you're going to harm it. The males don't sting at all, and very few, many of the native bees are solitary bees, so they don't have a hive to defend, so they're not going to sting. So I think if you're worried, usually it's a wasp that has stung you or that you're worried about more so than the bees somewhat. The fragrant sumac functions really almost as a ground cover. It's a low growing shrub. It gets mostly, I've never seen it get 6 foot tall, but it does spread out to possibly 8 feet. It does fine from sun to shade. It is not particular about the soil at all. And the foliage has a nice scent to it, which makes it deer resistant. It's tolerant of being around black walnut trees, and the female plants have small red berries in the fall that the birds um, like. We have this along our tree row on the street side of our yard, and it really does well. And the color in the fall is brilliant red. It's beautiful. So it's really a nice shrub. The Virginia rose is, if you want roses or you like the rose smell, this has such a strong fragrance compared to many of the hybrid um, or tea roses that it's really a great rose. The blossoms aren't fancy like the more cultivated roses, but the aroma is very nice. It gets about 4 to 6 feet tall. It likes sun more than part shade, but it will do okay in shade. It likes sandy, loamy soils. You may have seen this if you go. They have it all along the walk in Agwanquet, Maine. They're putting in all native plants along it, and the smell in this early spring is just amazing. Like I said, and they do attract the birds and butterflies, and and then it develops the bright red rose hips in the fall that the small mammals like. It attracts bees, butterflies, and even hummingbirds like it. And you do get some fall color with the foliage. So instead of the autumn olive, and we had several of these on our property when we moved in, and we've taken out all but 2, and they're going this year. They are a problem to take out. You pretty much have to either dig up the roots or grind the roots, because they will come back from the root if you just cut it off. But the northern bayberry and the serviceberry are shrubs to think about if you want to replace your autumn olive, if you like it. The northern bayberry is a deciduous to semi-evergreen shrub that grows 4 to 8 feet tall. It's a pretty dense shrub, which gives shelter to the birds and is useful for for shelter in the winter as well as during the summer, during inclement weather, that type of thing. You do need a male among your group to be able to get pollination and have the blossoms, which aren't particularly showy, but they do develop berries that are fragrant, and all of the berries are sometimes even used as the scent for bayberry candles. But what's really great about this is it has a symbolic relationship with a bacteria that fixes the atmospheric nitrogen. So it has an added benefit of improving your air quality more so than just the average plant. Serviceberry is another tree that I really personally like. It gets 6 to 20 feet tall, but I don't know that I've ever seen one that's been 20 foot. Ours are closer to about 8 to 10. And you get small white flowers in the early spring that the birds and butterflies like. And then it develops red purple berries on the female plant in the late summer, early fall. And the fruit tastes somewhat like a blueberry if you can get a hold of one. But the birds really like it, including goldfinches, titmice, blue jays, cardinals, and chickadees. But you do need a male among your group to be able to get your fruit. It's not particular about sun to part shade. It's not really that particular about soil. It does a little bit better in an acidic soil, but it does adapt. And it does have really pretty fall color as well. The border privet, I know a lot of people use this for privacy and like it. But substitutes for that can be the American arborvitae, the black chokeberry, or the boxwood, which is one of the natives that we'll talk about. The American arborvitae is a pretty tall shrub, but and it is typically deer sensitive. You'll see many of them have been browsed up to about 6 or 8 feet by the deer, but they do make cultivars that are smaller, and then they make ones that are more deer resistant. We have one of these down by the road that replaced a large evergreen that fell, and so far we've been very lucky in that the deer have not bothered it at all during the summer. We do protect it in the winter from the deer and from the salt from the road, because the salt will brown the branches and the leaves. But it's fairly low maintenance. It does well in full sun to light shade. It prefers a little bit more fertile soil. It's very fast growing, which is one of the reasons that we chose it, because the tree that fell was quite large and left a big gap. And this one has filled the spot very nicely. It's dense and provides shelter for robins and house finches, and it is tolerant of the black walnut being in the area. The black chokeberry is a shrub that gets 3 to 5 feet tall, 6 to 10 feet wide. It has berries in the fall and red foliage as well. It prefers sun for more production, but the white flowers in the spring are a favorite of the birds and bees, and the berries are very popular among the birds in the fall. It tolerates part shade, but you do get more fruit and more flowers in the sun. And you do only need one of these. It's self-pollinated, so you don't need a male and a female. Just one bush will work very well. Boxwood, I didn't include a picture of because I think everybody knows what boxwood looks like. Many people have been having a lot of problems with their boxwood, though, because of disease and insect problems. And some of those is the boxwood blight, the Voltella blight, Polytophoria, leaf miners, nematodes, and mites. So there are some alternatives. They're not quite the same as the boxwood, but if you've got boxwood and you aren't happy with the way it looks, some of the Uramus, the greenspire, and the Manhattan are good substitutes. The soft touch is actually a holly, and as well as the inkberry holly. The inkberry holly is a native plant, so that if you wanted to stay native, that would be a good one. The yews, the plum, the Dutch garden, and the vestigia are deer-resistant choices. The northern bayberry, which we've already spoke about, and the Habica arborvitae nana are good choices. That if you've got boxwood and you are not happy, the boxwood is not an invasive species. It does stay green year round. In my neighborhood, which has a lot of deer presence, I mean, it's not unusual for us to have anywhere from 10 to 20 deer in our front yard during the winter at times. I can't say that it's never been browsed a little bit, but it's not been eaten enough that it has caused any damage to it. The shrub honeysuckle is quite invasive. We had so much of it when we moved in and pulled it all out. Um, and it really left an open, really opened up our under the trees. But the white meadowsweet and the red osier dogwood are good choices for that. The white meadowsweet particularly is a small shrub. It grows about only about 3 foot tall. It does prefer full sun. The white has really pretty white clusters of flowers that attract the birds and butterflies, and it's a larval host for the spring azure. Um, and native bees really like it. And it tolerates most soils except a really heavy, wet soil. So I think it would be a good choice instead of a honeysuckle. And we'll talk about a native honeysuckle later. The red osier dogwood, I really like for its 4 season interest. It can get as far as tall as 7 feet and as wide as 10. It takes very well to pruning. It does do well in sun to part shade, adapts to most soils. It has clusters of white flowers in the spring, and then it has white berries in the fall. And between the flowers and the berries, over 98 species of birds are attracted to it, including woodpeckers. And then in the winter, it develops these bright red twigs, or, or and that's when I trim mine and bring some of the twigs in and use them in arrangements or decorations in the house. But it's really nice to sit there and look at that in the winter. If we don't have snow, in the gray, brown, drab scenery, and then it really, really shows up against the snow in the winter. So it gives you such nice 4 season interest. It's a great shrub. The burning bush, which was one of my favorites before I realized how invasive it had become. When we moved here from California and saw the burning bushes, we went out and bought several of them because we thought they were gorgeous. We have since taken out all but 2, and we will take out at least one of those this summer. The red chokeberry, the black chokeberry, the gray dogwood, or the weatherwide viburnum, or even a blueberry are good choices for that if you like the red color of the burning bush in the fall. The red chokeberry adapts to most soils. It grows to 6 to 8 feet tall, and 3 to 5 feet wide. The fruit it fruits more in full sun, but it does fine. It grows fine in part shade. The white flowers appear in late spring. They support some of the birds and butterflies. The berries in the late fall support the birds as well. And then it develops this really pretty red foliage that is quite comparable to what a burning bush would do. So it gives you that red color as well as helping to support some of our pollinators. It can be nibbled by the deer, but once again, we have not had to do enough damage to it that caused any damage to the shrub. The black chokeberry we've already talked a little bit about. It's similar to the red. It's a little bit smaller. It only gets to 3 to 5 feet and 6 to 10 feet wide. The berries are larger and purple instead of red, but it once again will develop the bright red color in the fall. The gray dogwood is a dense shrub. It grows 10 to 15 feet tall. It has the white blossoms that's popular with for the birds and the bees, is an important pollen source and nectar source. The white berries in the fall support many of our birds. There's over 100 species of birds that can use those berries for food, along with the squirrels and chipmunks. And it has red foliage in the fall. It does well in most soils. It does prefer something a little more organic, but if you're putting it in out in among your trees, it would be a very organic soil probably anyway. And it does provide, because of the density, it provides um, a place for birds to seek shelter along with nests. We've had a cardinal family actually build a nest in one. The weather rod viburnum is a very showy shrub. It grows 15 to 16 feet tall. It has the creamy white fragrant flowers that, like anything else, supports our birds and butterflies, all of our native shrubs. The fruit is initially green and then gradually changes over the summer until it finally ends up being black in the fall where it's eaten by the birds. It does well in from sun to part shade and tolerates most soils. So it's really quite good. And once again, I mean, it's stated that it's browsed by the deer. We don't have one of these, so I can't say from personal experience, but it might need a little protection until they learn that that's not supposed to be eaten. Blueberries, I think everybody's aware of. They're certainly tasty, and the deer and birds will eat them before you ever get to them, and if you don't protect them. They also require incredibly acidic soils that without treatment, I don't think most people have. They grow 6 to 12 feet in height, and they do require sun, but the foliage does turn bright red in the fall. So it is very colorful. Um, oops. So instead of the winter creeper, which is more really a shrub, but often functions as a ground cover. Some of the things you can think about are bearberry, sweet fern, alligator spurge, and the moss phlox. The bearberry is an extremely hardy. It is a shrub because of the structure of it, but it functions as a ground cover. It only grows about 6 foot tall, maybe a foot. It has dainty white pink flowers in the spring that are very fragrant and that support our pollinators. And then it will develop red berries late in the summer that the birds like. It is deer resistant because the leaves are a little waxy and they don't like the leaves. It does prefer acidic soil, but it will adapt to most soils. And it does better in full sun to partial sun. It doesn't do very well in the shade. But it is a great ground cover for a sunny spot. And in the winter, it gives you some winter interest in the foliage turns a bronze color. The sweet fern is an interesting plant. It's not a fern. It's of the bayberry family, actually. And but it has this sort of almost forms a structure similar to a fern. It grows 2 to 4 feet tall and almost twice as wide, but it takes a long time for it to get that big or that wide. The flowers are something most people wouldn't even think of as being flowers. They're brown catkins, which are kind of like almost like look like sticks that appear before the leaves do. But somehow the birds and butterflies know that they're the flowers and they will visit it for food. It does well in part shade to full sun. It does particularly well in poor soils and will improve your soil by being nitrogen fixing for your soils. The leaves are fragrant when they're crushed, which makes it deer resistant. It is a larval host for the gray hair streak butterfly. So you might have some butterfly damage to it. And when I do my pollinator talk, I tell people that some of your plants are going to look awful at some point during the summer, but they'll recover because that's what they're there for. And you have to talk to yourself and tell yourself, that's why I planted it. The Allegheny spurge is a Pachysandria, but it is, and this is the other one that's questionable whether it is native to New York. The Cornell website listed as a native, but when I look at the native map, it didn't look like it was to me. It was maybe the borderlands of New York, but it's not an invasive like the Japanese Pachysandria. It does have some of the same characteristics in that it's 6 to 12 feet in height. It forms a dense ground cover. It does well, very well in the shade to part shade. The flowers are white or purplish, and they are fragrant. So it is a ground cover if you really like the way Pachysandria looks. This is a safer plant to plant than the Japanese one that we're mostly familiar with. Moss phlox is one of my favorite ground covers because of the brilliant color that you get in the early spring. It does well in sun, two-part shade. We really don't have much full sun, so and some would argue none. But so it's in part shade, and it just develops a vibrant purple flower in the late spring, which is a great source of nectar and food for the pollinators, the birds and butterflies. It only grows about 6 foot tall and forms a pretty dense mat. It does spread, but not, I mean, it takes years for it to make a huge mass like that if you start with a small one. I mean, I think I started with probably a 4-inch pot, and probably in 5 years I had maybe a 12 to 16-inch patch. So it doesn't spread aggressively. It does well in average soil, and it's not very particular. And I'm going to include some other choices that I particularly like and that we have put in our yard because of the benefits for them, not that they substitute for any particular landscaping shrub. And the arrowwood viburnum is one of them. It grows 5 to 6 feet tall and spreads about as far. It's not particularly fussy about soil. Any soil pretty much it will adapt to. It does well in full sun to part shade. The white clusters of flowers in the spring are a great source for butterflies, native bees. It's a larval food source for spring azures, red admiral butterflies, and the hummingbird moth. And then it develops blueberries in the fall that are attractive to the eastern bluebird, the northern flicker, and the American robin. And then in the later, it develops a fall color, either orange or red, depending upon how much sun it gets. The American cranberry bush is another one that we've put in because of the benefit, because of what I thought was the benefits for our pollinators. It well, like sun to part shade. It grows 8 to 12 feet high. It gets 8 to 10 feet wide. We have one that's 3 years old, and it's probably about 6 foot tall and maybe 3 foot wide. So it takes a while for it to get that big. It has white flowers in May, um, and brilliant red berries in the summer. And to get more berries, it's recommended that you put in 2 or 3 of these. And the berries are eaten by the birds, so that it's a nice sheltering shrub. The nanny berry is also another viburnum that does well in sun to part shade. It grows to up to 15 feet high and 10 feet wide. It has a lot of creamy white clusters of flowers in mid-spring that butterflies are attracted to. Once again, it's a larval host for the springer butterfly. And it develops deep pink or yellow fruit in the summer that turn black into the fall, and then the berries are enjoyed by our birds. And none of the viburnum that we have been severely damaged by the deer. So the choke cherry versus the choke berry is a different genus and different family. It prefers sun to part shade. It grows up to 20 feet tall. It has the really very attractive white flowers that show up so nicely in back against the forest background of the trees and in a shaded part. And the butterflies really like those long stalks of white flowers. And then the red berries turn dark purple in the fall, and many of the birds flock around those to get them. If you really like hydrangeas, but are kind of, I can't grow them, those big purple, pink, floppy hydrangeas, the hydrangea arborescens is a native shrub and really very easy to grow. It does well in part shade to dappled sun. It grows about 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. It has very large blossoms midsummer that turn green in the fall and then bronze in the winter. We prune ours back mid to late March. Probably we prune it back about a third, and we have them on a northern slope in our backyard, so it does very well in mostly shade. And the butterflies and moths and birds do visit the flowers on a regular basis. They are deer resistant and salt resistant. So if you put them in an area where you might get some salt spray from the roads. If you really like honeysuckle, this aroma of it, the northern bush honeysuckle is a native honeysuckle. And the way to tell your native honeysuckles from your invasives is a native honeysuckle has a solid stem. So if you cut off a piece of the stem and look at it, it's solid. It's a native, where the invasives have a hollow stem. They are very low maintenance, not picky at all about shade or sun. They'll even grow in dry shade. They are not particular about the soil. They have yellow flowers that are very fragrant in the spring and early summer, and become a host plant for the laurel sphinx moth, and the snowberry clearwing, and attract pollinators. And then they develop a very pretty orange-red foliage in the fall. And I like them because they don't, sometimes you need a smaller shrub in the front of your your border or under a window or something. And this is a good shrub for that. So I promised you I'd share some of my references. Um, the native plant finder through the National Wildlife Organization